Hello and welcome back to Bricked and Mortared. My name is Kirsty Merriman and I'm a full-time bespoke infill property developer based in Auckland. Today, I'm not talking about disputes as I said last time, I'm talking about infrastructure. Why? Because there are some major issues that we're facing. Some of us are already dealing with it and others will no doubt find them. So today I'm going to talk about what those issues are, why we have them, what are the costs associated with building and infrastructure, and why we can deal with this. Hopefully you'll be interested in infrastructure after this. So why is it an issue now? Well, obviously we're increasing intensity of our developments, and we need to make sure that the pipes and the schools and the community facilities can cope with the number of people. But it's going to cost money. So we've got brownfield sites, and they've got a lot of old pipework around them, some of 80, 100 or more years old. It's broken, kaput, needs to be updated. Not sized also for the increased volume of people living in the area. And of course, the government wants to flood the area with land. So they're wanting to extend the rural-urban land boundaries to open up new greenfield sites. Yeah, that's actually easier to develop because you put new infrastructure in, you're not digging up old stuff, and it all mostly happens at once, not the way it's happening at the moment, which is hodgepodge. So I looked at a site to develop several months ago in Papakura in South Auckland, and in doing that I discovered a lot of things, and it got me asking lots of questions and talking to more people. So some developers were trying to sell off their land. They'd been confronted with letters from Veolia as part of the EPA process to say you need to upgrade a 1.6 kilometre freshwater line. It's going to cost $2 million. Or you need to connect two wastewater pipes across an entire block, maybe 100, 200 metres of wastewater line. You need to upgrade waste pipes in a domestic suburban area, 120 metres of that, and that's going to cost you $700,000. But you can group together in a consortium, share the cost amongst yourselves and do it. That doesn't quite work. People have tried, but you're talking about small, different developers that may have a day job. They don't know how to coordinate, and there is no mechanism to share those costs. Also, everyone is doing something. So I had to do something for one of mine, 30 metres. I had one group digging up just 30 metres, and that all got churned up, and someone else over the other side of the road was doing their share of stuff, got churned up, but it would have been far better if it was one company doing it. So let's look at what the costs are and how infrastructure works in the perspective of a project at the full level that someone like me sees as the developer. So we have project costs, general, that's the design cost, and that's your architect, your engineers, etc. So that will bundle up for a four-house development, roughly $150,000, excluding GST. We then have the earthworks cost. So that's the cost of demolishing the old house, clearing, scraping the site, levelling the site. That's the cost of installing your public pipes, your drains. That may be retaining wall costs, and maybe putting big piles in if you need to. So it's not actually a slab up, but it's the extra foundation you need to do. I'm saying for these purposes $250,000 because it's not going to necessarily be the easiest of sites. Then you've got your build cost. This is what's generally related to the per metre squared rate. Now, you can't compare one person's per metre squared description with someone else's. Someone may include the site work, so earthworks, and so they may do design for free. I don't know. But for me, it is the slab up, it is the superstructure. And that is nominally $2,200 per metre squared, excluding GST at the moment on a construction management model. So let's multiply that for a 95 square metre house, and I'm going to magically get $200,000. That $200,000 is made up of two components, the labour cost and the material cost, 100,000, 100,000, or 50-50, very roughly. Now, at the moment, everyone's talking about the insulation and upgrading, how it's costing more. That's kind of just that bit out of that 200,000, probably a bit of labour and a bit of materials, but it's not a big chunk of the whole project. Then we move on to our utilities, our infrastructure connection costs. That, I'll list the costs, so that's just for the ability to connect into the public network. You need to, because the house doesn't stand alone. Well, not an inner city one. You can go off the grid, but probably not in a city easily. So what we have there is we have the fibre optic cable. Very roughly, $2,000 per house. Vector electricity, that very roughly. Now, I've got a figure that's based off a lot of information I've got, and the pattern seems to be about $15,000 per house. You can get that down, but we won't go into that in this podcast. Water, to be able to connect to the freshwater and wastewater network, that's $20,000 up here. Then we've got our development contributions. So that's the human density factor component, $14,000. That's for transport, that's for parks and reserves, that may be for community facilities such as libraries, etc. Then we have the other development contribution component, which is the environmental or the stormwater. So that's the more ground you cover, the less rain absorbency you've got. So that is multiplied up. Different councils do it different ways. I've got a very, very strong opinion on how I think it should be done and how some of the experts recommend it's done and have advised the council it should be done. We'll deal with that another time. But for the cost here, we're talking about $24,000 for one house. So that's a large cost. That's $75,000. Now look at that $75,000 in perspective to your build cost or your design cost. It's half of your whole design cost. It's a big chunk. It's a large portion. So we've got those costs. Now that's all well and good. That's a build up cost. But I have to see, can I afford it from a feasibility perspective? And are those costs now reasonable? So let's start in Papakura. I'm going to say the $800,000 as a cost to a sell price is probably within plus or minus for this type of product, for this type of market. And that $800,000 includes GST. So I'm going to whack off the GST and selling price. So I'm left with $675,000 to work with. Can I make a project stack on $675,000? Well, we know the build cost is $200,000 per house. So all of a sudden my 675 comes down to 475. Okay. So my infrastructure is $75,000. Let's whack it down. We get down to $400,000. And then we've got, I'm going to group that design and earthwork. So that was 150 and 250. Group it together, 400 divided by 4 houses. It's another $100,000. That brings my 400 down to $300,000. So I'm at that point, but I still haven't got a contingency. I haven't coped with the nasty surprise I'm getting for Papakura. How am I going to pay for my wastewater pipe upgrades? How am I going to pay for the 1.6 kilometres of water line? I haven't paid for land. I haven't paid for management. I haven't paid for finance. I don't have profit built in there, and I don't have admin costs. Clearly, this number does not work. And of course, after a half-hour look, the project for me was long gone. I know that I can't put the house price up much more. If at all, in the past you would. But people can't borrow that much. You have to base your selling price on what is achievable. So it's a no-go. So I was okay because I hadn't bought anything. And I looked at all of my infrastructure costs before going any further. But a lot of people actually haven't been able to. Why? They've been caught out. Maybe they bought land at high prices and couldn't afford to carry on developing it, so just put it on ice. And then they came and revived it and discovered that they had no consent for public infrastructure anymore. They had to get a new EPA, and all of a sudden they were being thrown these costs. You may get people that are trying to sell sites to you and they take 2.5%. They'll come in and say, this is a good site, it's got all services on site. Yeah, that's only half the story. The bigger story is, how does it connect into the network? You need to look at these things in detail and know them, and don't go unconditioned on a site until you know it. And make your best friend a really, really good civil engineer, one that's connected in that area. They should have good relationships with people within the council and Veolia for Papakura, and know what's going on. You don't want to get caught out buying a site that you can't develop, especially now. And what can we do long term? Well, you can actually trim your infrastructure costs back. There is scope for doing that. I don't think people really understand how they're made up and how they're calculated. And when they get the assessments, they may trust that they're done correctly. They may not be done correctly. And of course, installing and connecting to vector network, there's room to move there. We've got two people that managed to trim back. One developer managed to get his 6-house development. A $122,000 stormwater contribution was reassessed down to $6,500. And someone else managed for a smaller development to trim off $25,000 off their infrastructure costs. All worthwhile. But that doesn't really solve the big problem, which is we've got aged, broken, and infrastructure that is not sized for the people that need to live in the areas. We can't solve it on a developer by developer basis the way things are happening now. I think more money needs to come into it because it's big. It's beyond, you give me a project, I'm just walking away from it. So it needs something bigger. So again, it's been bandied about. Where is the GST going that we pay for our development contributions? Could that go back into a local fund for infrastructure? What about the value add component of GST for the new houses that have been built? Should that go back in? It would be far more efficient to upgrade pipes if it was all done together instead of someone doing 10 metres or 30 metres somewhere else. There has to be a better way. So, as you can see, infrastructure for me is a big issue. That is the thing stopping a lot of our developments. I couldn't progress on this Papakura one. The design costs weren't out of this world. The earthworks costs weren't out of this world. The build costs weren't out of this world. But the infrastructure costs and the surprise is out of this world. It is a no-go zone in some areas. So, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on Bricked and Mortared.